honestly, the primary problems I have with the Endwalker lore are, very similar to the problems that I had with Final Fantasy XIV 15's lore in that, it very much the lore in the very much so dies on whether you actually care at all. And Final Fantasy flaw is just I've been with it for a long time, and yet, I haven't really managed to establish much of a emotional bond with the main cast, of the game and everything. So I just kind of have a lot of difficulty, feeling the emotions, and I guess you could say that Alpha Node and Yustone and all the others, you know, my my experience of playing this has just been kind of this character is my ally in the fight against this great evil that won't let go of the past, but it doesn't go any deeper than that. Like, there's no actual connection to the character. So what took over during the experience was especially after Shadowbringers, it was hey, this is some of the best villain writing I've ever seen in Final Fantasy, in Final Fantasy franchise history, because, looking back on the years and seeing like the way that, Kefka turned out and everything, and he got progressively worse, although it seems like his ambition, he's kind of in the wrong place and everything, and he was always going to be this nihilistic shithead. He wanted to destroy everything and hated everybody and everything, and, just so twisted because he's a twisted, crazy, insane villain and everything, and that he may be iconic, but I feel that Final Fantasy's biggest weakness in all of its lore's history has been the villains, because as iconic as some of them are, like Sephiroth is definitely badass looking and, tough and everything, but I don't recall a time in the history of Final Fantasy that I found myself feeling quite as sympathetic for the villain as I had during, during the Shadowbringers era, as I started to, feel that sense that the Askians may have the wrong idea about things and refuse to let go of the past and everything, but they are a tragic figure. I feel sorry for them. And to me, that was signaling something about Final Fantasy's potential future, because it suggested that the writing team that was, responsible for some of these games was actually getting better at writing and everything, and they were getting better at doing what they do and everything. They were really leading into the lore, and so it seemed like mature story writing was finally starting to come out of them, and everything except the villains, because the better stories like Red Cloak and like the Order of the Stick, they all do that. They manage to hook you in a way where you disagree with the villain ultimately in his mission, but you feel sorry for them anyways. You feel the acute sense of what they lost, and Final Fantasy 14 manages to make you wrestle with this moral question of, our world surviving literally has to crush the hopes and dreams of the civilizations that came before us and, collapsed and everything. You have to wrestle with that. You have to wrestle with the fact that you're denying them the restoration of their dream to see, the world the way that it used to be and everything, and it was beautiful the way that it was, obviously. Otherwise, they wouldn't be so in love with it the way that they are. And so it makes you mourn for them, even as you're trying to stop them from destroying even more to bring back peace and everything. And, it does that very, very effectively. And, Shadowbringers would have been a good outro to because of the fact that it made that so much more front and center. It really forced you to wrestle with that question and that moral ambiguity and everything. And I've never had that, from Final Fantasy and everything. And all the people that are like, "Oh, the best story." I mean, do you read? Because I've seen better books than this, and how Endwalker ended up, and everything. Better told stories. And so, the problem for me is that like I'm not really feeling Alpha and say, any of these the good guys. The only thing that I really have as as the person watching it is that I think that they are the good guys, and I side with their mission. But I don't feel anything for any of them, you know. And that I think is the problem in a big way with the lore for me, from my vantage. To me, like Final Fantasy in its darkest moments. Seeing what happened in Endwalker kind of feels like vandalism of that lore in particular. It feels like there isn't any respect. By the end of this lore, Hydalin's dead, Zodark's dead, and Xenos is dead, and Vanadil is dead, and all the fucking stakes of the universe are gone. The final days have been averted, so the story is effectively completely resolved at this point. That's my interest in any of it. Because they want you to walk away from it with this whole idea of, oh, now all that stuff and the drama and the main things that were building the story for this whole entire time is gone and the disaster has been averted, and so now we can look at all the adventure we can now have and fill this world up with now that all this has been crushed, and that's just not interesting to me. I don't care. My whole attachment to the story was riding on the conflict between, Hydaelyn and Zodark, and to see those resolved the way that they were, it feels disappointing. Rather than a grand protracted, conflict between the two, we get this instead, and it feels abrupt and right there all of a sudden. And so now the story that kept me interesting has had all of its threads resolved. There's nothing left for me in it after the 6.0 patch and everything. There's just nothing. There's the whole foundation of what made the story compelling in the first place has now been blown to smithereens, and there's nothing left of it. So now in order to do anything, they're going to have to build a new foundation and everything, because there isn't one there for me. I don't care. You see, a lot of the lighter hearted moments of the series to be just too cheeseball-y for me to give a shit. They're corny. I don't care. And I felt that way the whole time about the whole thing. It's the juxtaposition of having to go from the story's lighthearted moments to its dark and everything, and jarring to say the least. And then, on top of everything else, every time I'm in some of those more lighthearted moments, I'm like, can we get to the actually interesting stuff? Can we get to something actually interesting happening? Can we get to something that's actually interesting? I want to rush through them, because I don't give a shit. That's that's the core problem with Endwalker for me. Not only that, I mean, I wouldn't have minded, to see those stories come and be wrapped up, but to be wrapped up as abruptly as they were. So that's why I break from consensus. I feel like, this is not up to Square Enix standard. I and so my most bitter disappointment about all this is that I walk away from this experience thinking to myself, I find it rather, I guess you could say that I find it rather strange that so many people are so defensive of and heap such massive praise on Square, Enix as a company, because historically Square Enix has done such a massively good job of raising the bar. Their games historically are wrapped in this, I guess you could say, like it was supposed to be a poke in the eye of the literary community and the world of, serious people when it came to story writing, because, in the games they ooze with this contempt that must have been felt by the developers, for the literary world's elitism and the idea that, video games were not a good and compelling medium to tell a very powerful and unforgettable story inside of, there is, and so it's everything I say against Endwalker comes from a place of love for Square Enix as a company and everything, and just I I know from personal experience playing these games that Square Enix is capable of writing, you know, incredibly emotionally powerful and compelling stories and everything. I've seen them do it time after time after time, and if Shadowbringers taught me anything, it was that the talent hadn't gone anywhere, it was still there. So to see everything followed up by Endwalker and patch 6.0 was a rather bitter disappointment for me, especially because, like I said, I haven't really had that sense of camaraderie with the main cast. I've had only a lingering feeling of, hey, I'm on your side, but I don't really care about you as a person. As as I play through it and everything. As I watched the whole thing go down, I don't care about the main cast. I side with them, but that the attachment doesn't go any deeper than that. And so to see all the plot threads basically, vandalized in this fashion, wrapped up cleanly in a nice bow is just like, this is not even a nice bow. This is just a bringing everything to its a fashion that feels rather rushed. At the end of the day, it feels very abrupt. It feels like we had all this setup for a very long and protracted conflict between the Askians and the Scions and everything, and now it's all in ruins. It's done, and I guess the sense is, how we're no longer constrained by the villains. We can now have a real adventure without needing to care about it. That's the thing. I don't care. I like. There's nothing left of the story for me to care about anymore. All the stakes are gone.